The old house smelled musty and damp, like a flood-prone basement left sealed for a decade. But at least it was cheap. The only one in town I could afford. Opening the kitchen window to air the place out, I surveyed the quaint little neighborhood I'd just joined. The street was quiet and well kept, the driveways completely cleared of snow, and each one immaculate in its own way. I'd brought the last box from the moving truck into the house only a few minutes ago when the doorbell rang. Opening it wide, I saw the smiling faces of a man and woman, both older with white hair, perhaps in their late 70s. They were bundled up for the cold weather, their cheeks and noses rosy red. "Welcome to the neighborhood," the woman said. "I'm Jan, this is my husband Ted. We saw you moving in and thought we'd bring a little housewarming gift. It's not much, just a tuna casserole." "Jan makes the best tuna casserole," Ted piped in. "Settle down, Ted. So what's your name, young man?" "Jordan. Thanks for the casserole, I don't think I've ever had one before." "Jan makes the best tuna casserole," Ted repeated, as if he didn't remember saying this 5 seconds ago. This time Jan didn't say anything, just rolled her eyes and looked back at me. "Are you getting settled okay? If you need anything, we're just next door." "Yeah, I'm doing great, actually. This neighborhood looks really nice. I grew up in a quiet little place just like this, in a small town. Definitely not going to miss the big city, that's for sure." Jan smiled warmly, and Ted kept the same vacant, contented look on his face, staring at some indeterminate point far off in the distance behind me. "Well, we're happy to have you. Okay, we won't keep you any longer. It was nice to meet you, Jordan." They turned around to leave, and then Jan stopped a second later. She urged Ted to go ahead while she waited for him to get out of earshot. "Oh, there's just one more thing," she said, turning around. Her face was unreadable as she said this next. "If a man comes to your door asking to shovel your driveway, let him. Just say yes. You'll regret it if you don't." Her eyes seemed to indicate this was some great secret, some unfathomable truth. And I realized her and her husband were a few crayons short of a full box. I also wondered if somebody needed to call the Better Business Bureau about some shady snow shovelers. Had these people been threatened? Was I being threatened? Were Jan and Ted part of the Canadian Mafia? Before I could ask any of these questions, she smiled a broad, toothy grin, completely inappropriate for the situation, and turned away, joining her husband on the sidewalk. They both waved and walked away. Even though they said they lived next door, they didn't go into that house, instead disappearing down the street. Well, that was pretty fucked. I wasn't sure what else to say, so I just closed the door and locked it, then went back to unpacking. The whole thing struck me as unsettling, and upset me to the point of almost phoning the police, but I held off at the last second, thinking how it would all sound. By the next morning, the whole event had faded a little bit from my memory, but I still thought about it from time to time. I couldn't help but wonder if they actually were my neighbors, but the houses around me all remained dark and empty-looking. Nobody seemed to live in any of them. Then the first snowfall came. It was one of those nights when you go to bed and wake up to find 4 feet of snow blanketing everything. It was pure white all around when I opened the drapes, and I actually gasped. When I had moved to this region, people had told me the snow would get really bad, but I'd never fully understood how bad until that moment. It looked otherworldly. Luckily, I had a snow shovel in the garage, which was accessible from inside the house. I'd have to dig my way out, but it was doable. I'd lived through some snowstorms before, having lived in Canada all my life, so I felt prepared for the task, daunting as it was. After grabbing the shovel, I went to open the front door, expecting an avalanche of snow to come flooding in. Instead, a freshly plowed walkway greeted me. There was a man standing in my doorway also, with sheer walls of snow 4 feet high all around him. He was wearing a black jacket and black pants, and had a typical shovel in his hand. He reminded me a bit of the old man from Home Alone, who Kevin McAllister is so afraid of at the beginning of the movie, only to realize he's actually a wholesome old dude with family issues. Except this guy had no wholesomeness in his eyes. Instead, they were hard and gray, betraying no hint of humanity. I knew immediately at first glance that he was something else entirely. "Good morning," he said, his voice gravelly and deep, his breath pluming frostily into the air.
I'm the snow shovel man. I hope you don't mind. Everyone around here likes me to shovel their driveways and plow their walkways, so I thought I'd give you a free sample of my handiwork. What do you think? Surely you'd like to enlist my services as well."
I opened the door and realized my heart was pounding far too fast. Stepping out into the walkway, I saw the man had cleared my entire driveway and my walkway in a matter of about 2 minutes. And not just mine, either. "How did you—"
"Old family secret,"
he said, tapping the side of his nose.
"So, how many weeks did you want to pay in advance? It's $50 a week, but trust me, around these parts that'll pay for itself in no time."
I was still too shocked by the state of my perfectly clean driveway to say anything. But then I remembered what Jan and Ted had told me. I was supposed to say yes. But it didn't feel right. There was something off about all of this. Nobody could shovel snow that fast. And what weird conditions would I be agreeing to if I said yes? Was this man a demon of some sort? Would he give me a Faustian contract to sign in blood? Right on cue, he pulled out a scroll of paper, so long that when he unraveled it, the thing unrolled straight down the hallway into my house, unfurling itself like a carpet for a king.
"All you have to do is sign here,"
he said, holding out a pen and pointing at a signature line on the miles-long contract. You know what? I'm gonna sleep on it, actually. I hope you don't mind." With a flick of his wrist, the contract rolled back in on itself and became a tightly wound scroll again.
"Not at all. Completely your decision. Have a nice day."
The man grinned malevolently and turned on his heel, walking back down the path to the sidewalk. He snapped his fingers, and all of the snow he had shoveled collapsed in on itself and covered the driveway and walk in front of me in one swift instant. It was as if he'd never done a thing in the first place. "What the fuck is happening in this neighborhood?" I muttered to myself and shut the door, forcing it closed against the wall of slush. For the rest of the day, I was too afraid to go outside. The whole thing had struck me as just too batshit crazy to cope with. So I stayed inside and drank a bottle of tequila, hoping to forget about the weirdness that had been happening since I'd moved in. It worked. I managed to fall asleep by 3 p.m. and woke up the next morning after a dreamless 18 hours of slumber. I opened the curtains and didn't quite understand what I was seeing, though. Everything was white. I went out to the living room and opened the door, and snow began to pour in steadily from outside, non-stop until the entire entrance hallway was full of it almost to the ceiling. Still, there was no sign of the sky or anything past the wall of snow. On top of everything else, my snow shovel was gone, as if someone had broken in and stolen it. Thinking back to when I drove into town, my heart almost stopped in my chest. Jan's warning reverberated in my mind as I pictured what I had seen at the sides of the road every so often, driving towards my new house in the moving truck. Certain spots where houses should have been, instead there were mini mountains of ice and snow. They looked like ice castles interspersed between regular houses. Only 2 or 3 of them that I could see, but there were probably more. At the time, I figured they were just designated areas where plows could dump their snow to get it out of the way. I guess that was true, in a way. They were the buried houses of other people who'd said no to the snow shovel man, like I had. I imagined them just like me, buried alive inside their castles of ice, trying fruitlessly to dig their way out while the sun began to melt and harden the outside into an impenetrable shell of ice. I should have listened to Jan. Now she's never going to get her casserole dish back. Sitting on my front porch the other day, I heard a sound. The pull cord of my neighbor's gas-powered lawnmower being yanked. It started up with one attempt, and the shiny new machine began to purr with quiet efficiency. As he went around the well-manicured lawn, trimming a 1/4 inch at most from the already short grass, I was reminded once again of how much crappier my grass looked. Bill always had the nicest yard in the neighborhood. Despite my best efforts, mine always looked yellowed and dying in comparison. The border of our properties had no fence, simply a defined line where his beautiful grass started and my mud pit began. Of course, I'm being overly harsh on myself, but you get the picture. He looked up from his work and gave a friendly wave and a smile as he turned around and I raised my coffee mug in salute, forcing a smile back at him. Bastard. How the hell did he manage to keep his grass so green? In a drought, no less. It was like he was painting it with fluorescence to make it glow with healthy vitality. The whole neighborhood knew he was up to something. At least, I did. They probably did too. Bill went out later that day and I decided to sneak into his garage to try and find out what he was using to get such amazing results. The door was open enough for me to crawl underneath. The garage was dark and quiet. There was plenty of fertilizer and yard equipment in there, but nothing nefarious. I'm not sure what I was looking for, something criminal, I guess. Kind of funny how things worked out. Bill wasn't happy when he came home and found me sneaking around his house. I was in the basement when he came in, turning the light on and startling me.
"What are you doing here?"
he asked, frowning, still not understanding. Never really knowing until it was too late. I guess what made me snap was finding out that he didn't have a special trick or a black market gizmo. He didn't have illegal fertilizer or dead bodies turned to mulch in his tool shed. He was just a normal guy, only better than me at lawn maintenance. That was what made me lose control. What made me grab him by the scalp and slam his head against the cinder block wall of the basement over and over until blood and teeth were flying everywhere. It was knowing that he was superior to me. I can see that now. I think I'm getting better. I'm afraid I might have to move again, though. The neighbors are starting to get really suspicious. They want to know why my yard looks so great all of a sudden. And Bill's has gone to shit. I haven't lived here long, so I just tell them I'm trying a new kind of fertilizer. The grass is always greener on my side now. Where do I even begin? I guess this all started a little while after our move to Maple Street. My wife and I had finally managed to save enough money for a down payment on a small house in Hampstead, our beloved hometown. We had lived in our quaint new bungalow for a couple days and were still unpacking our things when we got a knock at the front door. Opening it up, we saw a couple standing there holding a casserole dish. They smiled at us warmly and told us they lived next door, and were welcoming us to the neighborhood on behalf of everyone. "Wow, that's so nice of you," I said, taking the dish they offered us. "I'm Jordan. This is my wife, Christine." They introduced themselves as Sarah and Greg, a married couple from next door. We spoke for a few moments, but they didn't seem to want to overstay their welcome. Shortly after arriving, they said they would be on their way. "Let us know if you need anything at all," said Greg. "I mean that. If you need to borrow a cup of sugar, whatever, we're happy to help out." "Thanks, that's really generous of you." Hey, that's what neighbors are for, right? Not 2 weeks passed before I took them up on their offer. It's not like I was trying to take advantage of them or anything, but I was putting together a new table and couldn't find my tools anywhere. It seemed like they had been lost during the move. I just needed a screwdriver, so I went over to Greg and Sarah's place and knocked on the door. Greg answered it and said he would be happy to let me borrow a Phillips head. He invited me into his garage while he went to look for it. He opened the garage door and I went in to join him. Upon entering, I realized that Greg was a compulsive neat freak. He had labeled drawers and cabinets for everything, and I was amazed to see an assortment of hammers, axes, and saws hanging from the wall, assorted by size and type of tool. Everything was clean and looked brand new. His table saw had no hint of sawdust or speck of dirt upon it. The blade gleamed like it had been freshly polished, though I could have sworn I had heard him using it just the day prior. Wow, you're really organized. Well, I'm an engineer, and I've been told we're a bit of an odd breed. I like to keep everything tidy, and I like to have a place for everything. Man, this is really something else. I'll need to buy some new tools now, I guess. Unless we manage to find mine once we get everything unpacked. Well, I'd recommend Ted's Hardware Store over on Main and 5th. They have a good selection and their prices are pretty decent. I like to support the local businesses rather than the big chain stores or online places, so I've been shopping there for years. He went over to a tool chest and pulled out a screwdriver. Here you go. Just bring it back when you get a chance, he said, handing it to me. Thanks. Much appreciated. After walking away, I realized we still hadn't returned their casserole dish. 3 weeks later, I saw the screwdriver sitting on my workbench. I cringed and realized then that we still had their casserole dish as well. At least he didn't seem to be taking it personally. I had seen him just that morning, and he had smiled and waved, acting friendly. I decided to go over to his place and bring the items back to him. When I got there, though, nobody was home. I felt awkward just leaving the items on the porch or putting the screwdriver in the mailbox, especially after accidentally keeping them for weeks longer than intended. So instead, I just took them back home and told myself I would bring them back on the weekend. Of course, I forgot to do that once again. We were busy running errands, and the screwdriver slipped my mind for a while once again. I didn't realize that Greg was upset at all, until I awoke in this dark, narrow wooden box. It was the same box he'd been in his garage working on for days. He had his garage door open yesterday while sanding it, and I'd asked him about it. It looked like a wooden coffin, except it was smooth and had no gaps in the wood. The thing looked sturdy, and the wood was thick and strong. "For a little experiment I'm working on," he told me with a grin. "I'll show you when it's finished." I was trapped inside here when I woke up, feeling claustrophobic immediately in the small enclosed space. I still had my phone, but noticed that all functions on it were disabled, except for a couple apps like this one. My breath caught like a dry lump in my throat as panic gripped every part of my body. Pure terror, like I had never felt before, began to consume me. I closed my eyes and opened them again, trying to convince myself I was having a nightmare. I wasn't. I could smell the fresh sawdust of the box I was trapped in, and beneath that was the aroma of wet dirt all around me. Alarm bells began to ring in my mind, and I tried to convince myself that it wasn't possible. I didn't want to accept the fact that I had been buried alive. My head was still spinning from whatever drugs I had been unwittingly injected with. My arm ached with a dull soreness as well, as if someone had stuck me with a large needle there. Pounding on the wood above me, I found it to be unyielding and sturdy. There was no hint of weakness across any part of it. Feeling groggy and sick, I turned on the flashlight of my phone to examine the lid of the coffin which I was now trapped inside of. Phillips head screws were sealing it shut from the inside. Hundreds and hundreds of them. They lined the edges, spaced barely a quarter-inch apart from each other. They spelled out a message on the inside of the lid as well. I used the flashlight on my phone to read the words left for me on the lid of the wooden coffin I was trapped in. The message from Greg, written with screws, read as follows. "Dear Jordan, you should have returned my screwdriver. I didn't care about the casserole dish, but that was my favorite screwdriver. I needed it the other day, and it wasn't where it was supposed to be. Everything needs to be where it's supposed to be. You ruined it. You ruined everything. The voices told me where you were supposed to be. Underground. In the box they said to make for you. Bet you wish you had that Phillips head screwdriver right now, don't ya? Greg." I don't know how I'm going to get out of here. I don't even know where I am or if anyone knows I'm gone. But the air in this sealed wooden coffin won't last forever, I know that much. If you're out there, Greg, I'm sorry. You can have your screwdriver back. Just please let me out of here. I'm begging you. I'll be a better neighbor, I swear. I'll be the best neighbor you ever had. I won't tell anyone you tried to kill me. Please? Please let me out of here? You can borrow my shovel if you need to. Please borrow my shovel? Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Sewall, Cheryl James, Pick Your Sticker, Teddy Dog, Clue 404, Mamakato, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan, Plarian 50, Devin Kyle, Timothy Baird, Ajeti, Bert Turner, Bajani Aspinall, Michael Pierce, Big Joe, Gary Harkonnen, LaDonna Spivey, Scott Tanaka, Tom Stewart, Sherman Davis, Bryce Shelton, Susan McClendon, Elise Batiste, Lisa and the Cult Jam, Open Circuit, Fabulavore, Raymond Jaggers, That Darn Fox, Raison Detra, Kai Gaming 99, Windy Burns, The Wendigo, Michael Squishy Park, The Gem Star, Vault 77 Citizen, Puppy Dan, Clovis Wolf, Eldridge Elm, Derek Prey, Elder Being, KC Hawaii, Rob T, Tragic Mermaid, Darren Fishnaller, Cloves Zanoya Harris, Roe Underwood, Florida Man Luke, Bethany's Mom, Winter's Kiss, Sam Brooke, The White Stag, Corgi Connection, No Name, Marta Cara, Professor Elm, Kathy Barrickman, Cybard Sands. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you get access to bonus videos, a Discord channel, and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.